Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak wa karrama wa majjad ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama tasliman kathira. Allahumma faqihna wa anfa'na wa ja'alna min al-mutahaqqiqin bil-ilmi بالعلم المقرب إليك والمنجي لنا يوم الدين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on the Tariqa al-Muhammadiyya of Imam al-Birgivi, this great manual of Taqwa, this great manual of practical spirituality, we have reached one of the most critical of traits, and every trait of the heart is critical, and you can look at salvation being dependent on that trait. And that's one of the marvels of the traits of the heart, because each of these, especially the core traits of the heart, the praiseworthy and blameworthy, can be seen as the basis of virtue insofar as the good traits, or they can be the basis of ruin in terms of the bad traits, because they're all interconnected, right? And this is the nature of whether disbelief and what results in it, or strength of faith, which is the opposite of disbelief. We can look at that in terms of misguidance and the elements of misguidance, of following innovation in matters of belief. It can also be that everything else can revolve around that, right? And this is part of the secret of the words of our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that truly in the body is a morsel of flesh, which if rectified, the entire body is rectified, and if corrupted, the entire body is corrupted. Truly, this is the heart, right? And the ulama tell us that this applies to not just complete rectification of the heart, but that if you work at rectifying key qualities of the heart, then other things will be corrected by it, because they're interrelated, right? They're interrelated, and that's the nature of both good and bad, that they come interconnected. And that's where, you know, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells us that from his Lord, mighty and majestic, that whoever draws close to me by a handspan, I draw close to them by 2 handspans. And whoever draws close to me by an arm's length, I draw close to them by 2 arm's lengths, right? And part of it is that the key to drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is changing the traits of your heart. And if you change any one trait, a whole range of rectification takes place within. One of these most essential of qualities is what we're looking at today, which is Riya, right? Which is showing off, right? And Riya is challenging to define, right? Riya is challenging to define, because Riya can be defined as showing off or insincerity. And he'll give us a definition, and this definition is tricky, it's technical, but it is precise and purposeful, right? Broadly, you know, in a simple way, Riya is the opposite of what? Ikhlas, of sincerity. Right? Now, Riya is the opposite. Riya can be seen as either a non-sincerity or active insincerity, right? So at a conceptual level, right? What is Riya? Riya can be seen either as non-sincerity. So you're either sincere or not sincere. So non-sincerity is Riya, right? Is insincerity, is just simply non-sincerity. If you didn't fulfill the threshold of sincerity, it was insincere, right? Then But then there are elements of active insincerity, right? Active insincerity. So it's not just if you're not sincere, you're insincere, right? So there's Riya as insincerity as being simply non-sincerity. Or it can be seen as active insincerity, where you actively sought other than what makes you sincere, right? So there are broadly these two considerations with Riya, with insincerity, right? Either just you're non-sincere, you didn't do it for the sake of Allah, right? So as he builds this up, he'll give us a definition of what is sincerity. Sincerity, simply put, is that you act for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Lillahi ad-deenul khalis, right? For Allah is sincere religion. وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. They've been commanded only that they be devoted to Allah, making their religion sincere unto Him. From Surah Al-Bayyinah. What is sincerity? Sincerity is إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ. It is you alone we are devoted to. That's basic sincerity is طلب رضا الله سبحانه وتعالى. Right? It's to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. And then of course we'll see sincerity because it has degrees and realities and fruits. So if you are not seeking the pleasure of Allah, you are non-sincere. And that's Riya in one sense. But you could actively have ulterior motives. Right? And we'll see where you are seeking worldly gain. You are seeking to impress people. You are seeking active goals other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's active insincerity. But then we will also see, as we progress through this critical chapter, that your non-sincerity, if we take Riya as you're either sincere or not, non-sincerity can be in your devotional works or your worldly works. Amal al-Deen and Amal al-Dunya. Devotional works, right? Which are your acts of worship, for example. But acts of worship is that whose primary purpose is seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Devotional works or Amal al-Deen, religious works, encompass worship, but also there's a couple of other areas that relate to acts of religion. Most critically, right, so they encompass our worship and the acts of worship, but they also encompass religious knowledge. Because it is a wasila maqsuda, right? Right? Mu'azzama, right? It is the necessary means to be able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is knowledge. You cannot know what to believe without knowledge. You cannot know how to engage in the acts of devotion without knowledge. You cannot know how to obey Allah without knowledge. So Amal al-Deen encompasses, number one, our acts of worship. Number two, it encompasses religious knowledge. Number three, it also encompasses serving matters of religion. Right? So religious service, right, which includes calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it includes the khidmat, ash-shu'un ad-diniyya, serving the matters of religion, right, which includes community service in the religious sphere, right, is of the matters of religion. So, and we'll expand on this, but it's important to understand the scope of, in religious matters, sincerity is obligatory. Acting without sincerity in worship, or not in acts of devotion, or in seeking knowledge, or seeking or spreading knowledge, or in the service of the religion, acting without sincerity in these three areas is ruin, full stop. And we'll be looking at this. Right? In purely worldly matters, in your work, in your family life, in your rest and play, right? You have to stay within the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but acting without intention is not sinful. The basic religious ruling of intention there is that it's recommended. You bought a fancy car because you like fancy cars. You had no intention in it for the sake of Allah. Yeah, it's non-sincere. So it is a type of Riya dunyawi. It's a worldly insincerity because you didn't do it for Allah. You missed out on reward. But intention in one's worldly matters, in one's social dealings, etc., there sincerity is recommended, right? And it is also safety, right? Why? Because you got the fancy car, you got the money, you want to spend it. But if you're not careful, what will happen? What's going to happen if you're not careful about doing it with sincerity for the sake of Allah? It's not in itself sinful, but it is dangerous. Why? Because what will creep in from that? What will creep in? You get a fancy car, then you get a fancy computer, then you get a fancy other things, right? None of this, none of these things are haram. Sincerity in these things is not obligatory. Like doing it for the sake of Allah is not obligatory there. It's recommended. So one is it's missed opportunity. You could have had eternal reward for these. Right? They say, بِالنِّيَّاتِ تَنْقَلِبْ الْعَادَاتِ عِبَادَاتِ. Through intentions, mere habits turn into acts of devotion. Just by intention. And the Prophet ﷺ inculcated all of these. Right? And he taught us how to make our worldly affairs spiritual through the du'as and dhikr that he taught and the meaning conveyed through them. And through this miftah that is al-niyya, through the key that is intention. And we'll be looking at that. But one is you missed out eternal reward, and that itself is loss. Innal insana lafi khusr. Man is indeed immersed in loss. But the other component is it's dangerous. It's dangerous. Why? Your work, if you don't do it sincerely, this is how it'll busy you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. رِجَالٌ لَا تُلْهِهِمْ تِجَارَةٌ وَلَا بَيْعٌ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَإِقَامِ الصَّلَاةِ. Accomplished ones. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes those who have that light of faith in their heart. Right? In the verses of light in Surah An-Nur, who embodies this light? Accomplished ones. رِجَال لَا تُلْهِهِمْ تِجَارَةٌ وَلَا بَيْعٌ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Whom neither trade nor transaction busy away from the remembrance of Allah. Why? Because they worked for Allah. And by having sincerity, their worldly affairs don't busy away from seeking the pleasure of Allah. Right? So our worldly affairs, our worldly engagement can make us worldly. Right? Can busy one. And what is worldliness? Worldliness is that which distracts one or busies one or takes one away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So our worldly concerns, our work, our family, our wealth, our worldly enjoyments, unless you pursue them with intention, will busy you away from Allah. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes them as being fitna. They're an intense test. Right? What's it? إنما أموالكم وأولادكم فتنة. Right? Your wealth and your awlad and your children, meaning your family, are a deep test. That will you seek the pleasure of Allah through them? And there's also the nature of fitna. It's a test most people are going to fail, or they're not going to succeed in it. And that's the nature of this life. It's ibtila, it's a test. And not being careful about these things brings in worldliness, brings in blameworthy traits of the heart. That's how people become proud. If they succeed, proud, arrogant, conceited. They accumulate wealth. They become stingy. They become greedy. When they see others who have more, they become envious. They have envy. They have malice. They have ill intent, ill will, enmity, right? And just something plain like just work, right? So they appear to be succeeding in their career, but they're ruining their heart and soul, right? They go from one success to the other in the worldly plane, but in their state with Allah, they're in ruin upon ruin. And this applies in worldly things, or if one treats one's seeking of knowledge or one's service to the religious community as a whimsical pursuit. And we've taken the harms of whim. We just do it because you feel like it. Why are you helping at the masjid? I thought it was a good idea. Okay, that started innocently enough, but it was whimsical. Suddenly you succeed. You got elected. Now you're proud. Then you become arrogant and conceited. Or you failed. Someone else got elected. If your intention wasn't clearly for Allah, rather than having the spirit of ta'awun, of collaboration, you will now be envious of them and have malice and enmity and all kinds of things. So this is where it needs, and then you fall into other petty sins, right? Some random person someone posted, they finished such and such seeker's guidance course, so they put this infographic and just committed a lie. First person in history to complete a seeker's course, and they put a little video clip of of someone going like this, saying, Zarur Jannati hai, that this must be a person of Jannah, because the first person in history to finish a seeker's course. Whereas bifadlillah, tens of thousands of people have finished seeker's courses, right? But it just counts as a lie. Why? For whatever random, purposeless reason that you said something like that. Without sincerity, you're in danger. And so one puts oneself in the path of harm. Okay. So there's worldly insincerity, non-sincerity, and religious non-sincerity. In matters of religion, and we said broadly, there are three aspects: devotional and knowledge, and the things that are in service of religion. And that would include religious community engagement. But in worldly matters, sincerity is recommended. But sincerity is also from practical caution. Because if you're not careful to be sincere, if you're not careful to protect benefit, right, you are missing out on tremendous reward, and you are susceptible to grave ruin. Okay, so today we're going to begin by looking at the fact that when he tells us about sincerity, right? He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَالتَّاسِعَ, the ninth of the blameworthy traits of the heart, Riya, is insincerity, right? And it contains, and he has 7 investigations, and we'll be taking this systematically. This will take us, inshallah, till the end of Ramadan, right? First is its definition, and then what is insincerity? Then how is insincerity expressed? And why is one insincere? Then hidden insincerity and the signs of insincerity, the rulings of insincerity, and then things that are unclear as to whether they're sincere or insincere, and then the treatment of insincerity. So he deals with this in a very structured manner, rahimahullah ta'ala. So the first investigation is the definition of insincerity, right? And then we're going to look at its division, right? So now, before we look at his definition, the commentator mentioned something quite useful. What is Riya? Right? Riya comes from the same root as showing something. Right? 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 Riya is, Ra'a is to see. Ra'a is to engage in showing something. So Riya, this is why Riya has a sense of showing off, but in the religious sense, it's also simply when you're not sincere. Right? So it has this both senses. Right? But the root meaning of Riya in the Arabic language has the active sense of showing off. Right? Because it's to إظهار الشيء على خلاف ما هو عليه. But it's to show something that is not actually there. Right? So it has a very negative sense. Right? Right? It has an active sense. Right? Right? But the religious sense, right? The religious sense is more specific. He says, هو إرادة نفع الدنيا بعمل الآخرة أو دليله أو إعلامه أحدا من الناس. Right? So let's take before we translate his definition, let's take a simple working definition, which is إرادة نفع الدنيا بعمل الآخرة. This is a basic definition, right? It's to seek worldly benefit with next worldly actions, right? It's to seek worldly benefit with next worldly actions. Any type of worldly gain by any action whose primary purpose is next worldly reward. And those would be those 3 things brought in a simplified manner. Right? So that's the core definition. But then he adds to it, right? إرادة نفع الدنيا بعمل الآخرة أو دليله, or through something that is an indicator of next worldly works. Such as what? You want to show outside Ramadan that you're fasting extra, so you make sure your lips are dry. So people say, oh, he's fasting today. Right? Right? Or it's indicator. Or أو بإعلامه, or by informing of it, of your next worldly works. That's showing off. Right? So, you did a little bit of tahajjud, say, last night tahajjud, I got some backache because my carpet is uncomfortable, so I was twitching, whatever. Like, so you talk about it so people know, oh, you did tahajjud. That's, so it's the actual, it can be, the riya, the insincerity can be it can be just within you, which is you seek worldly gain by next worldly action, or you show it by indicating signs of this, right? Or by pointing to things that indicate your religious actions, or you inform of it, right? أو إعلامه أحدا من الناس, or you inform others of it من غير إكراه ملجئ, without there being necessity, right? الباعث على نفسه, right? That causes one to inform, right? Unless one needed to inform of it, right? For some genuine reason, right? And this part, so this definition, some people criticize this definition for some of the extra parts, but he's trying to be thorough, right? But a practical definition to remember of Riya is طلب الدنيا بعمل الآخرة. And he says, right? What is the opposite of it? It says وضده الإخلاص, right? The opposite of it is sincerity. The opposite of it is sincerity, right? The opposite of riya, of insincerity, is sincerity, right? What is sincerity? He says ضده الإخلاص وهو تجريد قصد التقرب إلى الله تعالى بالطاعة عن نفع الدنيا والإعلام السابق, right? The opposite of insincerity is sincerity, and this is the heart of religion. ألا لله الدين الخالص. Truly Allah's is pure religion. That what is khalis, and that is the ideal of Islam, is purity, right? Is purity, right? And you've not fulfilled the divine command without that. You are not alive without sincerity. Everything else is just imagined, is just forms and appearances of religion. The reality of religion is sincerity, right? And we go from being just metaphorically servants of Allah to being true servants of Allah, to the extent that we acquire true sincerity. All of religion is a journey of sincerity. This is why this is so salvifically critical. What is sincerity? هو تجريد قصد التقرب إلى الله بالطاعة عن نفع الدنيا. Right? It is to singularize one's intent in one's acts of obedience to be drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without any element of seeking worldly benefit. Right? 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 Sincerity is to singularize the purpose of one's acts of obedience to be to draw closer to Allah without any consideration of worldly benefit. And this is a test of life. Right? You don't make money from acts of worship. This is a test of knowledge. That the test for scholars, for students of knowledge, the test for those serving the deen, because you are living on a worldly plane. That how do you devote yourself to devotion or to knowledge, its pursuit or its spreading? How do you serve the religion? How do you serve the community of faith? Seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone without consideration of worldly benefit. Right? And there's a personal duty in this and a communal duty. That's why institutions emerged that supported the people of knowledge, that one facilitated people to allow themselves to be devoted, right? So in the busyness of their work, etc., you facilitate devotion to them so they can devote themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? How do you facilitate the pursuit and spreading of knowledge? While, because knowledge sought or spread without sincerity does not benefit, rather it harms the one pursuing it and can harm those gaining it. Community service that is grounded in material considerations will cause great harm even when there may be some apparent benefit. So this is a challenge at the individual level, that we must struggle and strive for sincerity, but also at the communal level, that if we do not establish our institutions of learning and the community institutions with that the material concerns are taken care of, so that those serving can then dedicate themselves with genuine concern, we are putting them in a very bad situation, and we're putting our community at in religious harm. And that's something in challenging times like this we have to have grave, painful concern about. That's why when we talk about the danger of a faith pandemic in economic crises, this is not a joke. It's a very real matter. Right? So what is sincerity? It's to تجريد قصد التقرب إلى الله تعالى بالطاعة عن نفع الدنيا, is to remove from one's intention in acts of obedience, is to singularize the purpose of one's acts of obedience to be drawing closer to Allah, and to remove any sense of seeking worldly benefit through it, or from any of the ways of demonstrating other motives, right? What is the consequence of sincerity? It is the perfection of faith. وَيُثْمِرُ الْإِحْسَانِ, and the fruit of sincerity, and sincerity is the religion, right? Right? What's the fruit of it? Its fruit is spiritual excellence. Ihsan, ahsana is the af'ala pattern from the hasan and from husn, from the good or the beautiful. Ihsan is exerting, ihsan is the striving to make something good or to perfect something. And that's the notion of beauty. Beauty is when all meanings of goodness are in their right place. Right? Husn is istikmal al-awsaf al-hasana. Right? Beauty is when all good qualities come in place. Right? So we have a standard for beauty. Beauty is not relative. Beauty is real. Or beauty is the real. Subhanallah. Right? Inna Allah jameel. Allah is beauty. And He loves beauty. Yeah. Right? So what is ihsan? It is ihsan, we could sometimes translate as excellence, or spiritual excellence, or it can be translated as perfection of religion. Ihsan is the active effort to make something good. It's ikmalu shay, إكمال الأوصاف المستحسنة في الشيء حتى يبلغ درجة الكمال والحسن. Right? It's exerting effort to complete the good qualities of something till it reaches its perfection or its beauty. Right? So that's why I say ihsan is al-ikmal wal-itqan. Excellence is completing something and perfecting something. It's exerting the effort to complete and perfect something. Therefore, so the ihsan from the servant is to strive to perfect the meanings of religion, the good qualities of religion, in faith, in submission, and in the states of their heart. Right? The fundamental driver of that is acquiring, upholding, and perfecting sincerity. Right? And to the extent that one acquires, upholds, and perfects sincerity, that is ihsan from the servant to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Sincerity requires soundness of faith, and to make one's faith sincere for Allah, to make one's submission sincere for Allah, to make one's heart and its qualities sincere for Allah. That is that sa'i bil jidd wal ihtimam, that striving with effort and concern. That is ihsan from the servant to Allah. What is its consequence? And that's why the Prophet ﷺ defined sincerity by its fruit from Allah to the servant, which is وَهُوَ الْإِحْسَانِ. What is the perfection of religion? Spiritual excellence, the attainment of spiritual excellence. وَهُوَ أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَى. And it is that you worship Allah as though you behold Him. That's not something you can do. That is something Allah grants you. Your role is to make your faith, to strive to make your faith, submission, and your heart sound and pure for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To exert the effort to make your faith, your iman, and your submission, your Islam in your actions, and the states of your heart, the awsaf al-qalb, sound and for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's from the servant to Allah. And the divine gift is that you enter into states of consciousness and ta'budullah, that you be in states of devotion to Allah, of submission to Allah, as though you behold Him. Right? So that is the fruit of sincerity, and why we concern ourselves with the harms of insincerity. Tomorrow we're going to look at the what is showing off, right? Right? And we talked about it a little bit, but that there are two types of insincerity, right? That there's worldly insincerity and next worldly insincerity. So we're going to look at this. But today we looked at the fact that Riya, insincerity or showing off, there's two types of insincerity, and Riya can sometimes also lead to showing off. Can be sometimes you can use showing off to seeking status and praise, because there's interrelationship between them, right? So we're going to look at this worldly and religious insincerity and the distinction and rulings of these two. We also touched upon the definition of sincerity, that sincerity is that you singularize the purpose behind your acts of obedience to be to draw closer to Allah and to remove from them any pursuit of worldly gain. And this should be something Of course, in acts of devotion, it's a bit easier because the act of devotion is between you and Allah. So the acts of devotion are much easier to do this with, right? Sometimes we lack the sincerity in them, but it's not that difficult to acquire. The real challenge for sincerity is, can you be, for religious people particularly, you have to be worried about the social dimensions of your religiosity, and we'll see how you show off. We'll be looking at that. That how you demonstrate your religiosity, do you talk about it, etc. But then number two, knowledge is required. But just as there is great merits in seeking knowledge, and ignorance is prohibited. And we saw some of the harms of ignorance in the second blameworthy quality of the heart. But knowledge with insincerity is more harmful than mere ignorance. Right? As the poet said, أيها الطلبة في المدرسة كلما أخذتموه وسوسة ذكركم إن كان في غير الحبيب ما لكم في نشأة الأخرى نصيب. O students in the seminary, all that you are taking is mere misgivings. If your concern is other than the one beloved, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you shall have no share of the next life. Right? Likewise, those who are serving others, right? It becomes haba'an manthura. It becomes like those deeds become like dust in the wind. Even if they're mountains of deeds whose form was good, but they're sought to show off for praise, for arrogance, for worldly gain. People, you offered a new curriculum of courses. Why? Because this is a good revenue generator. You decided to build a new masjid because this way, our masjid will be bigger than that other communities. Right? Nothing will enter paradise except that which was tayyib, that which was good. Inna Allah tayyib la yaqbal illa tayyiba. Allah is pure and accepts nothing but the pure. Right? This should make us, particularly in matters of knowledge, in matters of service, be of particular concern. But we also see that if you wish to lead a religious life, you have to be aware that ruin comes in frequently indirectly, because we live in this world. If you're not sincere in the 40, 50, 60 hours that you spend at work or pretending to be working, if you don't concern yourself about sincerity in your family life, in your social life, in your idol, in your worldly pursuits, if there's no sincerity there, then you are trading yourself to be insincere, to have a heart that is swayed by all kinds of things besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And no amount of dhikr and these things will have benefit, because there's so much pollution that the water of dhikr, etc., is getting polluted by the state of the heart. Then of course you must fuel, the greatest fuel of sincerity is remembrance of Allah. But that remembrance requires zuhud. You must renounce worldliness. What is worldliness? Is the things that distract from Allah. And what the beginning of distraction is your intention. Right? Do what you're doing with intention. Right? Do what you're doing with intention. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us sincerity in deen and sincerity in dunya, and protect us from all aspects and manifestations of its opposite. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.